Hi, everybody. Welcome to the 7 Unbreakable Rules of Digital Strategy Success. My name is Ahava Leibtag, and I'm the author of The Digital Crown, Winning at Content on the Web. I'm really excited to bring you these 7 unbreakable rules, and hopefully you will find them really helpful. Today, we are going to talk about why content is so hard and why it's so critical to digital strategy success. We're also going to talk about what content really is, 7 rules you can implement in your organization, and then what I really like to do at the end of every webinar is give you 5 tactical takeaways that you can use right away as soon as the webinar is over from some of the information that we go over today. Before I begin, I just want to tell you a little bit about myself and frame my own experiences in digital strategy and digital marketing. I started my career working in advertising and public relations. I worked in the corporate communications firm of an international recruiting agency, and I was responsible for print and web communications. I was pretty low on the totem pole then, but it gave me a flavor for what was going to happen with the web. And I then came to Washington, D.C., where we're having lovely weather today, and I got a master's from Georgetown University in communications, and then I worked for the federal government. And there again, I managed print and web communications. I started Ahava Media Group, which is a content strategy and content marketing consultancy located right outside of Washington, D.C. in 2005, and since then have managed more than 150 web projects, big ones, small ones, in a myriad of different roles, which you see on the screen. And one of the things that I started to think about was that no matter what kind of project I was working on, no matter what industry, no matter what size company, no matter who was on the project, we always kept running into the same problems over and over again. And I never really could understand why content was so difficult. And it seemed to me that there was a thematic element that started to appear to me about why people were having such a hard time with content projects. And so the first one was that I would come in, and as the writer or the project manager, I would say, who are we talking to, and what are we trying to say, and what are the goals that we're trying to accomplish here? And when I would talk to the people on the other end of the line, they didn't really seem to know who their customers were, or if they knew, they had very sort of shaky outlines of who they were and what people were supposed to want to know about them. So that made it really complex to be able to create great content and digital experiences for customer if you don't really know who they are and what they care about. Another thing that was always tricky was that we had a really hard time identifying the right stakeholders and getting the right stakeholders in the room. So with stakeholders and with digital strategy products, it's really important to get the right people in the right room at the right part of the process to make the right decisions about the project. And that was always very challenging to us. We were never really able to do that. There always seemed to be this process where we would bring people into the room at the very beginning, and we would seem to have everybody there, and then we would get to the end of the project, and the people who would have finally approved the project hadn't been there at the beginning of the conversations. And that became very cumbersome because they would often want to change direction right toward the end. We would spend hours arguing about silly things like what to call the organization, or what the right name was, or what the voice and tone should be. And that used to take up hours of conversations about these projects and how to make them successful, even though, quite frankly, that should be a really small detail. And there was always argument about who should be publishing this content, who owned this content, where should it live on the website, who was really the person ultimately that was responsible for making sure that it was archived or taken down when it was no longer fresh. And in the last few years, social media has really taken center storm with content. Who's going to distribute all of this content and make sure that we continue to create brand communities and, engage people around our content and our messages and what we were trying to say? And the problems just seemed overwhelming. I remember being on many different digital strategy projects and being right in the thick of things and going along with the strategy that we had planned, and then recognizing that, we were really in over our heads and that we needed to change course, or we were told by executives, we don't like what you're doing and we really want you to do something different. And then there would often be scope creep. So we would come into a project and we would do discovery and we would try and understand what it was that we were trying to do with this particular project. And then, a quarter of the way in or 3/4 of the way in, somebody would always come up with some other idea that they wanted to add into the project. And we would say, well, that is going to cost more money. And they would look at us like, why? Why is it going to cost more money? Money also seemed to be this really strange wormhole. Very often we would be, almost done and they'd say, well, there's no more money left on this project. Or sometimes they would even say very scarily, there really never was any money on this project. And it just always felt like our hands were tied. And it was so frustrating to me because just by nature, I'm the type of person who I'm always trying to improve process and make things better. And I just felt like no matter what I tried, no matter how artful I tried to be in the conversations at the beginning, no matter how much I tried to scope out what was going on, no matter how much discovery I went through, I kept hitting these same walls again and again and again. And what I started to realize was that the production and management of content reveals the flaws in a business. It's just extremely complicated and complex to pull together people in an organization and get them to produce content. And really what is at the heart of digital strategy, content that is going to improve the user's experience and create those conversions that you're looking for. And I think the reason that is because content lies at the intersection of people, process, and technology. So when you look at this diagram and you see these overlapping 3 circles and they're spinning like crazy, because how many of you in an organization think that people, process, and technology stay the same? I know we're all in agreement that they're constantly evolving and changing. If content happens at the intersection of these 3 things, then it's really almost impossible to get your hands around it. And it started to occur to me that there just had to be a better way. There had to be a better system to implement. I knew from my work as a content strategist that systems create freedom. And I really felt that if there were sort of some rules to follow about how to, wrap your arms around all of this and lasso all of this energy that was around digital projects, but that kept getting misdirected in all these different ways, that we would make life easier for all of us who are in the web and all those content professionals who deal with the core of digital strategy experiences. So before I talk about those 7 rules, I just want to talk a little bit about what content is, because I think very often when I walk into rooms and I introduce myself as the writer or the content professional or the content strategist, it doesn't really matter what name I use. People look at me, wide-eyed and feared, and they get nervous. We're going to talk about content? Well, what is that? What do we mean when you say content? And what I always say is that content is a conversation. It's a conversation in a marketplace, particularly online. And in any healthy conversation, we need 2 elements going on at the same time. The first is we need to know to whom are we talking. And the second thing, and for us, that means who is our customer. So when we think about who we're talking to, we know that we're talking to our customer. And in order to have that healthy conversation, we really need to understand our customer. The second element that we need in a conversation is who are we? We need to know what we stand for, what the brand personality is. A brand is the promise of something. And so any brand in the world that has done its job has really created an impression for the audience that they're trying to reach about what they're going to get when they encounter this brand. So I like to play this game at conferences. When I speak, I'll talk to an audience and I'll say to them, tell me what you think about Amazon. And, invariably people will say, fast, reliable, everything that I need. And I'll say, tell me how you feel about the brand Walmart. And everybody will say cheap. And then we'll talk about, well, tell me what you feel about the brand Nike. And people will say, just do it, athletic. And then I'll say, tell me how you feel about the brand Apple. And people will say innovative or, technology. And it's amazing because, you can have 400 people in a room and they're basically saying the same synonyms. And the reason that is because good brands understand that they're creating an expectation. And that's what people need from brands. And that's what they need from their conversations with their brands. So the reason content is so important to the digital experience is that it's really at its core. Those conversations are why people come to all of your digital properties. It's why they come to your social media channels. It's why they come to your websites. It's why they email you questions and look at your FAQs. They're trying to get information and they're trying to create a conversation. And so content is the conversation that fuels the sales process. It's really the thing that you need to be able to reach the achievement threshold that you want to reach. So I want to clarify what I mean when I say achievement threshold. Every organization has something that they're trying to achieve. In a lot of organizations, it's profit, right? Revenue and profit is what drives the company. But some of you might work at not-for-profit or in organizations where revenue isn't necessarily your focus. It's not the thing that your bosses are pushing you on. And if that's the case, you still have mandatory things that you're required to do to prove that you're useful to the company. And that's what I say when I mean the achievement threshold. It's, again, content is that conversation that fuels that sales process. If you're in a not-for-profit or in an environment where the sales process isn't what it's called, it's still vital for you because you need to reach that achievement threshold. So if content is the conversation that fuels the sales process, let's take a look at what that sales process looks like. And so for many, many years, marketers used the traditional marketing funnel where leads would come in at the top and then they would go through a funnel where they would become qualified and then the person would turn into a customer. And what I didn't like about that representation, particularly as a graphic, was that people fall out at the bottom of a funnel and then you don't really engage with them again. But in today's world, we're really lucky because we are able to engage with our consumers through social media, through email, through digital ads, and we can really reach them. And so I created something what I call the customer loop. So at the beginning, you start a relationship with somebody. They find your content and they become an audience member, and that's in that purple box on the left-hand side there. And then as you follow them through, what typically will happen is that if they find your content, it means that you're doing something right with your search engine optimization, and now I think it's called search experience optimization. Or you're doing something right with your social media networks. You're really using them to put your content in the right places so that your target audiences will see you and use your content when they need something that you're talking about. And then they'll come to you with a question in their mind because the thing that people care about more than anything is themselves. And it's the first thing that they think about, and they want to know what your brand is going to do for them. So they're looking to answer questions, and they're looking to create a relationship with you by making sure that you can establish trust with them. Once they establish that trust, so in many of your organizations, this may not happen, but it may. Sales will engage the prospect. And so that's the sort of point of view where sales will reach out and say, we notice that you're interested in our content either because you've downloaded a piece of content or because you called an 800 number or because you sent somebody an email. And now we want to talk to you about your specific problems and how we can help you. Then hopefully that process goes well and the prospect makes a purchase. And now in the orange box is what real digital strategy can do for you. It can really help you nurture those customers so that they don't fall out like the traditional marketing funnel, but instead they stay with you and they continue in this customer loop, and either they continue to purchase from you over and over again, or they just stay in a relationship with your brand so that they'll recommend you to friends and colleagues and peers. So just to recap, we talked about all the challenges that we really have as digital strategists in doing these projects and managing them successfully. And then we talked about how content is a conversation. It's a conversation in a marketplace. We need to know who we're talking to, and we need to know who they are. And really, the web has changed things so dramatically for business. This is a quote from Jonathan Kahn, who's a content strategist out of England. And he says, and this is the quote that I used to open up the book because I really think it frames exactly what I was trying to say. To actually improve user experience in a sustainable way, that is, while achieving business goals, we need to help organizations deal with the revolutionary changes that the web has created in their business models, operational structures, and customer relationships. Denial isn't a strategy. And so when you look at this quote, that's exactly the problems that I was talking about at the beginning. The business models didn't translate well to the virtual environment, either because people didn't understand them or because a lot of different things needed to take place in order to get things running properly. Same thing with operational structures, and also true about customer relationships. We used to think about customers very differently than we do now. Now they can, look at our storefronts 24/7, whereas before they had limited access. So we can't be in denial anymore about what we have to do with digital strategy. We really need to find a way to attack it in a way that's going to give us, as digital strategy professionals, the most amount of control that we can have. And so we need to decide, who are you talking to? Who are you as a brand? What are you trying to say? When do you say it? And where do you say it? And this is the external messaging component that content professionals really need to help their organizations understand and map out so that they can be successful. But there's a whole other side of what content is about, and this is where it gets really confusing for a lot of organizations, is the internal components. Who's responsible for all the different phases of a content strategy? Who's going to plan this content? Who's going to create it? Who's going to publish it? Where will it be distributed? How are we going to analyze it? And are we going to make governance a part of every single phase of the strategy? And so there's these internal and external challenges, and that was why I wrote the book, because I really wanted to create a system. As I said before, systems create freedom around digital strategy projects. And I thought, if there are some rules that I can put in place for people about how to manage these projects in a more effective way, I think that we'll start to see some inroads in this denial isn't a strategy problem, where the web really has attacked the way that we do business. So how can we think differently about these projects and sort of institute some parameters around them so that we can really make these projects run more smoothly and really help organizations deal with the challenges that the web has brought up within their organizations. So here they are, the 7 unbreakable rules of digital strategy success, and I'm going to go through each of them with some examples. The first is start with your audience. Obviously, you need to know who you're talking to. Involve stakeholders early and often. Keep it iterative. Create multidisciplinary content teams. Make governance central. Establish workflow that works. And invest in professionals and trust them. So let's go through each one of these, and I'm going to talk about why I think they're so important to an overall digital strategy successful project. So the first one is start with your audience. So this is an email that I received recently, and I've blocked out all the identifying information, hopefully. But the email came to me, and the subject line was upcoming webinars, training, and conferences, which isn't really something that I would typically open, but I happen to know the sender, so I did open it. And he starts off by saying, "Hi, Ahava," which is a nice touch. He included my first name. "This is my last update on upcoming events for the year. I hope you are looking forward to good times with family and friends, and I stopped reading because there's nothing interesting to me here. I don't really care that, the holiday's coming up. I know that. What is in it for me?" And so unless this email is from George Clooney or President Obama, I'm not really interested in this person's upcoming webinars, training, and conferences. Brands do this all the time. After this webinar, walk around and take a look at the communications that you get. Americans are bombarded by 5,000 messages a day. Look at these messages and ask yourself, is this brand talking to me or about themselves? Because very often this is what brands do. They don't make the person that they're talking to central to the content. And since they don't do that, the person ignores them. So this is a website, I promise you, you can go to it. It's live now. It's for a hotel in Zurich. And that cow mouse thing that you see in the middle there is, the pointer for the mouse. My guess is that this is a place that you can make a reservation for this particular hotel. I don't really know what the clock in the left-hand corner means. And I'm not really sure what the other thing means, except that the red reservation at the button actually may be something interesting where I could click. But if I were going to Zurich, I would probably not choose this to be my hotel. This is content that I and my team had to rewrite for a major cancer center, and I'm going to read it to you, and you're going to see why it needed to be rewritten. Breast Care Clinic. The Multimodality Breast Care Clinic, BCC, sees over 100 breast patients every week with over 200 new cancer cases evaluated annually. The BCC is staffed by surgical oncology, medical oncology, radiation oncology, advanced nursing practitioners, plastic surgeons, research nurses, clinical navigators, and a genetic counselor. The Breast Care Clinic was among the first to be recognized and certified by the NAPBC this year. The Breast Care Clinic facilitates complex multimodality care in a setting which fosters participation in state-of-the-art research trials. Now, I don't know about you, but if I'm a breast cancer patient, I really am turned off by this content. First of all, I have no idea what the NAPBC is. They evaluate 200 new cancer cases a year. Is that good? Is that high? Is that bad? And the language is so elevated, and it doesn't tell me anything about me or what I'm going to get out of it. And like I said before, brands do this all the time. They focus on themselves and talking about what they want to talk about instead of focusing on what people want to know and what people care about for themselves. And so you end up with a bunch of sad Macs as customers. So one of the things in user experience that we've learned to do is we've learned to create personas so that we can incorporate all of the things that we know about our target audiences into sort of like a one-pager. And if done properly in organizations, these personas can really help bring your content alive. And here's why. Once you know who you're talking to, you can really create a backstory for this person that helps you create empathy about him or her. And when you're, as a content creator, when you're thinking about empathy and you start to build an idea of who this person really is in your head, the person becomes alive to you, and the content that you create is just that much better for them. And so that's why we spend a lot of time with our clients thinking about who are you talking to, using research, real research that we've done about these people or that we have from other firms that have done research about those target audiences to create these composite characters. Then we go out to the organizations at large and we ask them, do these people sound real to you? Do they sound like your real customers? Are they people that you talk to on a regular basis that you think are looking for your products and services? And by doing this and by creating these sort of composite characters or these personas, you really give people the leg up that they need to start creating content around what feels like real people instead of these blobs out there that you might be talking to when you're starting to create content. And so I mentioned research before, and I think it's really the critical part of rule number 1, which is start with your audience. So customer research is really important, and if you have budget dollars, definitely spend them on finding out as much as you can about your customers, where they live, where they work, what they buy, what they eat, who they live with, what they care about, what gets their interest, how they consume information. All of those questions are so incredibly important for you to be able to answer them. And not only to be able to answer them, but to know for sure that you're right about that. So when I first started working in this field, I worked for a hospital and I wrote content. And I used to go into the hospital's waiting room and sit down. And I didn't identify myself as somebody who was involved in the hospital's marketing, but I would just chit chat. And I would say, you know, did you look at the website before you came here? Or what made you decide to pick this doctor? And I didn't ask any personal revealing information. I just wanted to get a sense from people of what they were looking for. I learned so much from those conversations. It really impacted my content. It made it 1,000 times better because I was talking to people who were on the front lines, who really, they were the patients. They knew what they wanted out of the content, and they were able to tell me what they really needed and wanted. And so I was then able, as the content creator, to create these wonderful experiences for them that were so much better than they would have been if I had just relied on what the doctors and administrators told me that people wanted. So definitely do customer research and find out who people are. Another really great way to know who your users are is to look at your interactive data. So certainly they're leaving information for you on social media if they're liking or commenting on things, or they're retweeting them, or they're reposting. Analytics will tell you a lot about who your user audiences are and why they behave the way that they behave. And I always tell people with research, you want to triangulate your data. So that means that you're going to have a hypothesis about why people behave the way that they behave. Find data points that support that, but make sure you find at least 2 or 3. Because if you have an idea and you have one piece of data like analytics, you can't really know what's happening on the ground until you prove that by doing some other research that proves why you think they're behaving that way on analytics. So make sure you have 2 or 3 data points to support your ideas about why your customers are behaving the way that they're behaving. And then ethnographic studies are really a powerful way to find out. The example of going into the hospital waiting room is one of them, but actually just observing people using your products and services can really tell you a lot about who they are, what they want, and how to give them the things that they need. So that's rule number 1, start with your audience. Now we're going to move on to rule number 2, which is involve stakeholders early and often. And I'm going to tell you a story about a hospital system that did not do that. So this is a system that has a number of locations and hospitals in it. And they wanted to combine them all into one website. Before they did this, every hospital and doctor's office had their own website where they explained who they were and what they provided and the different services that they could give people. And when auditing all this content, the people said, the people high up said, well, we can't really afford to keep writing all of these different content. Why should 3 different hospitals have the same content that talks about, cardiology, for example? Well, that's fine, and that's definitely one way to approach it, but they didn't go out and talk to the stakeholders at all the different hospitals, and they didn't get their take on changing the way that the content was on this one big system website. And so the content ended up being vanilla and bland, and patients who were looking for services at one particular hospital weren't able to find the information that they were looking for. And unfortunately, this resulted in a 50% reduction in online appointments for this particular system. And as we know in today's competitive healthcare marketplace, that's just not acceptable. And the reason that this project failed was not because the strategy was bad, but because they didn't consult the stakeholders about what they really should do to pump up the content to make it as robust as possible for these customers. And the reason that probably is because people are very hesitant to involve stakeholders. And that's why rule number 2 is involve them early and often. And the slide here talks about the push-pull that you have with internal stakeholders. Internal stakeholders and external stakeholders are obviously your customers. Internal stakeholders are the people who can give you the information that you need about the content. But you always have this push-pull with them because they always want to tell you what they think customers want to know. And what I always say is, how do you know that, client X? How do you know that your customers want to know that? And if they can't prove it to me, that's when I can pull out all of my customer research and say, well, this is what we've learned about what customers want to know. And this is what we know about what we found about what customers need. And look at these personas. Do they make sense to you about the customers who are interacting with you on a regular basis? So it's really important to involve stakeholders because what you need from them is to gather the information that they have to build your content. The senior content developer at my firm, Ahava Media Group, her name is Nancy, and she calls it juicy content. And I think it's such a great term. What's the juicy content? What's the information that's really going to get people either excited about your product or service or give them the information they need to make a really important decision in their life? And stakeholders give you that information. They're on the front lines every day, and they can really provide you with that information that helps you build that juicy content. The other really important part about stakeholders is that they help you understand their part in the content lifecycle. And so if they're part of producing, managing, analyzing, and governing content, you need to know that. And that's why it's really important to involve them early and often. However, and I can hear some of you shaking your heads on the other line, well, what do we do? Because a lot of them are difficult, Ahava, and they don't agree with us, and they argue with us about what our digital strategy should be. And So what I always say about stakeholders is that you need to show them the problems, bring them the website or the social media page and say to them, this is an issue that we're having with our customers. They're looking for this information and we're not giving it to them. And walk them through those content issues. You may have the opposite problem. You may have stakeholders who are really interested and who really want to know what's going on. And they may be bothering you on a regular basis about, how they're not happy with the website and how the content isn't doing what they want it to do. And those are great people to engage with. Sit down with them and find out what they're thinking. Get them off their defensive posture and say, I hear what you're saying and I want to solve this problem with you. So can we figure it out together? And then when all else fails, as a Jewish mother, I believe you can always throw food at a problem. Try meetings with food. They really do change things. Invite them for a brown bag lunch or take them out. Very often when people go off-site to a restaurant, their whole demeanor changes and you can relax. You can sort of connect on a personal level and then you can turn your attention to work. And I found that can be a really helpful way in getting stakeholders to sort of come over to your side of the force and help you solve your content problems. So that's rule number 2, involve stakeholders early and often. Now we're on rule number 3, which is keep it iterative. This is an example from Cisco.com. So if you go to Cisco.com's website right now and you enter in the word blog, you will see the first result you will be given was the Christopher Burgess video blog, which was released on Christmas Eve 2008. And you know that people were hanging on, waiting to hear about important survey findings on data loss. The second result that it will return to you is how to create a personal blog with WordPress on June 11th, 2010, because that's where people are going to find out about how to do that. They're going to Cisco. And then the ISBG blog was released on November 13th, 2012. And one of the reasons that the web is such a garbage dump of content is because it's so easy to create content. It's just zeros and ones. And so people will very often put things up and completely forget that they're there or not curate them or not make sure that they're kept consistent. The other problem the web is such a garbage dump is that people are still very much mired in the print mentality about creating content. So I grew up in that, as I told you in the beginning when I told you about my background. Professionally, that's how, I was trained. Somebody would write something and then somebody else would edit it and then we would edit it again and edit it again and edit it again. And then we would hand it to a designer and the designer would lay it out. We used to call them blue lines, which were proofs. And then we would review those again and edit them again and edit them again until the thing was letter perfect. And then it was sent to print. But that mentality has to change in digital strategy. We can no longer afford to be mired down in the either thinking about it as it's so easy to produce, we're going to do it like that, and I was just snapping my fingers there, or thinking about it from the point of view of we have to get it letter perfect before we put it up. And all great companies understand that in order to get better and iterate, they need to constantly be changing, but they need to be doing so with a strategy. And you see here, this is the Apple computer over the last 30 years, how much it's changed. We all know most of us, or I don't want to say most of us, but a lot of us use Apple products on a daily basis. And we need to think about content as a product. If we want to go from good to great, as Jim Collins says, we really need to think about our content as a product that we strategically plan, test, and iterate on. And so the way to iterate is to first evaluate your process, find out what it looks like. What does your process for creating content and for managing content look like? And then review 2 past projects. Just do a post-mortem on them and see how they went. Just brainstorm about it together with your team and see, is there anything that you learned from the last time that you could definitely change for the next time you try that project so that you're incorporating what you've learned. And that's very similar to the content strategy life cycle. That's what we do in content strategy, which is the internal publishing strategy of an organization. Who is responsible for all these different phases, and how do they make sure that content comes out consistently every time? And the way that they do that is, you can see the gray arrow going around the outside of the circle is about how every phase is supposed to lead into the other phase. And the analyze phase is right before the plan phase so that you can take what you've learned and incorporate it into the next cycle. So that's rule number 3, keep it iterative. We need to move away from the mindset that it's done, and we need to move towards the mindset of we're going to strategically plan this product and we're going to test it and iterate upon it until we get it to be as close as possible to perfect. Rule number 4 is create multidisciplinary content teams. And so I'm going to tell you a story from my own personal life that I think will illustrate why this is so important. My husband and I have 3 children. I like to say we run a very small, very not-for-profit company together. And we like to take, pictures of our kids. Obviously, they're growing up and we want to capture those memories. And then every 3 or 4 months, I create a photo book and I put all of the pictures together into this, into these little books, and you can write little captions and, put pictures of where you've been, and it's all very artistic and fun. And so when I first started doing this, we had one digital camera in the family, and that was what we used. But as the technology changed, they started putting, cameras and phones. And my husband was able to start taking pictures of the kids with his iPhone. So this is a picture that he took of my son. Every year on all of the kids' birthdays, we take a picture of them holding the year of their birthday. And my husband did this with his iPhone. Now, when I put together the photo books, because I was used to only using one camera in the family, I forgot that my husband had all of these photos captured on his device. And I forgot to ask him for them. And so when I printed out the photo book and he opened it up and started reviewing it, he said to me, I had all these pictures from this time that we went to the beach. How come they're not in here? And I looked at him and I was like, I completely forgot to ask you. I totally forgot that you had them. And so just think about that. In a small family, we're married to each other, so we're 2 people, and we're both really invested in this content project. We want these photo books to be great for our kids because we want them to see what a fabulous childhood we are producing for them, and we want this content in there. But we can't even get it right. And so when you think about that in two people together, and you multiply that across, a multinational organization, you realize the inherent challenge with content. It's a shared asset, and it has to be treated as a shared asset. So just like rule number 3, keep it iterative, teaches us that content is a product, rule number 4, create multidisciplinary content teams, teaches us that content is a shared asset. So now let's talk about what multidisciplinary really means. So multidisciplinary is a word that refers to having different specialists in something look at a problem so that they can each contribute their own expertise and knowledge about that problem. And so what I recommend in your organizations is that you create one team that has 2 types of people on it. You want to have as many user experience professionals as you can manage that are helpful. So these would be information architects, visual designers, usability experts, social media people, content strategists. These are all people who can help you run your digital strategy projects more efficiently. But then you also want to have people who have company expertise, who can break down those silos, who are within the organization, and who can bring you back content that would have, before you selected them for this team, been captured on their device. Just like my husband's pictures were captured on his iPhone. So he and I created a multidisciplinary content team because every time I make a photo book, I told him, do me a favor, send me all the pictures you have on your phone. And he forwards them to me and I'm able to put them in the photo book. And so just as I reached across a silo to make sure that the content was fully robust for my kids, you need to reach across silos in your organizations and find the people within your organizations who are really interested in creating these phenomenal content experiences for your audiences. And so these people will help you adapt to changing technologies by bringing you innovations into what's going on in the field. They'll also help you break down silos, and they'll bring you much better ideas in the long run. So who should you look for? Because anytime you bring anybody in on a team, you want to have people who are helpful, not people who are going to be a hindrance. So I recommend subject matter experts on your products and services, people who design them, sales, customer service, people who qualified leads, really people on the front lines who can tell you as much as you need to know about your customers, who they are, and what they expect. Now we're going to move on to rule number 5, which is make governance central. And I'm also going to tell you another story from my personal life. You're really getting to know Ahava. So last January, my husband and I decided to go away. I was in the middle of writing the book and I needed, to get away for some peace and quiet. And so we decided to take a vacation at this hotel in Puerto Rico. You can see this lovely resort. And when I was looking for a place to stay, I started with TripAdvisor because I wanted to find a hotel that had a kitchenette and a couple of other things that we were looking for. And so TripAdvisor brought me to this particular resort, and I looked at all the different rooms that were available, and there were 5 different rooms. In this picture, you can see 3 of them. And I decided to use the first one because I figured it would be the cheapest. And when I clicked on View Details, I was taken to this page that said, blank is an enclave of private villas that enjoy sweeping ocean views, fully equipped kitchens, and 24-hour butler service. Boasting many pleasures, the Cliffside Resort offers an extensive array of active pursuits, perfect for those seeking a truly enchanting destination. And this gray box was on every single room type that you could get at this hotel. So if you were reading this, you would assume that every single room had a fully equipped kitchen, correct? Nope. When we got there, there was no kitchen. Now, luckily, I had booked the travel through American Express. So I was able to call American Express, and they called the resort. And when I was on the phone with the woman, she's from customer service, she said to me, Mrs. Leibtag, what made you think that you would be able to get a kitchen in your room? And I said, well, look on the website. It's on every single page. And she said, you're right. And she called the resort. And they had to upgrade us. Now, they didn't upgrade us to the 1-bedroom garden casita. They had to upgrade us to the 1-bedroom ocean view casita, which resulted in a $400 a night charge for them, extra than what I was spending, that they had to comp us for 4 nights. So that's $1,600 in lost revenue because of a simple content mistake. This is the homepage of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. I will read to you what's new at FERC. On May 31st, 2011, FERC headquarters will be closed on Wednesday, June 1st, 2011. Only emergency personnel that have already been contacted are to report to duty. All other personnel are on administrative leave. Now, this is on the homepage of a federal government's website, and it's grammatically incorrect, it's not capitalized properly, and it doesn't really make any sense. Would you really want that on the homepage of a government agency? And that's why governance is so important. We want to create a consistent experience for our audience all the time. And in order to do that, we need to implement these governance tools. So content workflows, editorial guidelines, style guides, taxonomies, archiving standards, and checklists. So this is the Creating Valuable Content checklist, and this is a checklist that I use for my writers to make sure that they are producing content that is valuable to all of our clients by making sure that it's consistent. And you can find this checklist at www.ahamediagroup.com. Now we're going to move on to rule number 6, which is establish workflow that works. While I was writing the book, my daughters liked for me to watch this show with them called DC Cupcakes, about 2 sisters that started a cupcake bakery together in Washington, D.C. And what I thought when I was watching this show was that there's workflow in everything. It's not just content. Cupcakes also have workflow. And what was so interesting to me about that was that in order to create these cupcakes, there was a baker, a main baker in the bakery, and he really knew the chemistry of baking cupcakes, and he understood how to make them. And then there were other people in the store who knew how to decorate them. But if they missed a step, if they didn't bake the cupcakes before they iced them, you would have had a really gross concoction there. And it sort of made me realize that governance is everywhere. Here's an example of where governance is a problem. This is the New York Times mobile website. And before you see the top news about bomb investigation, you see arrest records are online. View yours now. Now that's governance because that's controlling the kind of ads that you see on your digital properties. And you're really responsible for all of the content that your audience sees on your websites. And if they don't like what they see, they're going to bounce like a rubber ball off your website. Here's another example of where governance was not implemented. This is Sears, and if you look at the bottom where that red box is, 0 reviews have been submitted for this product. You get to post the first review, you lucky dog, you. Does that sound like Sears to you? That's not their brand identity and personality. So we have to be really careful in digital strategy projects of making sure that we're providing this consistent user experience, that we're providing the right people in the right roles for workflow. And that's why you need to be able to map out your workflow really, really carefully. You need to make sure that you have people in the requester roles, that you have people in the provider roles, that you have people in the creator, reviewer, approver, and publisher roles. Because if you can't map out your workflow perfectly, you're going to end up with content that's like an unbaked iced cupcake. And while some of you may want to eat something like that, I think most people would prefer to eat a cupcake that's been baked and then iced. Rule number 7 is invest in professionals and trust them. And this is really, really a critical piece of digital strategy, and something that I hope that this book and the ideas that this book brings up will help to change. As an outside consultant, I'm very often called inside an organization to provide direction. And I have a different perspective because obviously I'm not engaged in the daily goings-on of the organization. I don't understand all the internal politics. I don't understand how everybody came to the company and their history and all that kind of information that matters people. And it's my job to provide, a map or a compass to the people that have hired me. But very often when I get inside the organization, it seems that people don't really want to listen to what I have to say. And I find that my friends who are consultants and other consultants that I work with also are frustrated by this in digital strategy. It seems to be really difficult to be able to provide any effective sort of advice or change. And the way that I want you to start thinking about digital strategy consultants is that they're like a GPS. So right now in your GPS, if you're using your phone, you'll put in your current location or it will find it for you. That's the magic of satellites. And then you'll put in where you want to go, whatever the end destination address is. And then you'll press, route or go. And the GPS will create that map for you to follow. So turn left here, go right here, drive 11 miles. And that inside part of that, those tactics are what you need to do to get from point A to point B. And that's what a great digital strategy consultant does for you. That person figures out where you are and what the things are that you need to implement in your organization to have effective change. And then they ask you and discover along with you, or read your strategy and translate it and understand what you need to do about where you need to go. What is point A in the purple circle on the left, and what is point B in the blue circle? And then how do we get there? How do we get where we want to go? And that is the goal of bringing in a digital strategy consultant. Getting that outside perspective really will change your organizations and really help you be able to map effective content and digital strategy experiences for your audiences. So the rules are, again, start with your audience, involve stakeholders early and often, keep it iterative, create multidisciplinary content teams, make governance central, establish workflow that works, and invest in professionals and trust them. Now, we're going to get to those 5 actionable steps, but before we do, I'm really excited to talk to you about something that I've been thinking about for a lot that ties back into rule number 7, which I talked about with the invest in professionals and trust them. There's so many roles that we need to do to create effective content. There has to be a better way to do them. And I think these rules will help in digital strategy. But one of the other problems I've seen is that we don't have an effective workforce who's really trained to do the roles we need people to do. There's a video going around right now by an organization. If you go to the URL code.org, it's a really great video. And it shows all these people in tech who talk about how old they were when they first learned how to code. And there's a dearth of people in the marketplace who really understand the back end and front end of a web system so that they can not only write well, but they can also code well and understand usability and understand how people interact online. And so I'm very excited to introduce Content University. And this is going to be online training for content professionals. And the goal of Content University is to create groups of professionals who really know how to write and market for the web, who understand content strategy and content marketing, and who can be really effective digital strategy change evangelists within their organizations. And so we're going to start Content University with a course called Simplify the Content Creation Process, a step-by-step guide to content that converts. Class 101 will be how to create content using a system. Class 201 will be making content findable, and Class 202 will be making content readable. So in Class 101, we're going to learn more about content, and I break it down into these three major parts that you really need to understand in order to be effective with your content. We're going to spend more time on start with your audience and defining your personas and creating personas that really make sense. And we're going to learn about research tools that you can use that will really help you define who your audience is and what they care about. And then at the end of that webinar, you'll get that list of actionable tips that you can begin implementing that day. Class 201 about making content findable will be about understanding how search engines really work, HTML basics, again, the ideas about code and how we make code accessible to people, how people hunt and gather for information, using available free tools for keyword research, and then again, you'll get that final 5 tips you can begin implementing today. And that Class 202 will be about making content readable. How do people read online? How do people consume information in a multi-channel world? Research to prove you need shorter content. How to design your pages for better user comprehension, which is really critical. The most important thing that digital writers can do is organize information for readers. And then again, those 5 tips you can be implementing that day. Now you can go right now to content-u.com and register for these webinars. They're going to be given in small groups where you'll be able to ask questions and interact with me. And I'm going to show you a lot of different things in these 3 classes. If you can't attend them all, you have scheduling conflicts, they will be recorded like this webinar will be, and you'll be able to watch them at your own leisure. But I do recommend that you come to the classes live because that will be your opportunity to ask questions. Now, I give these classes for thousands of dollars. I fly around the country all the time and give these workshops, and they're very, very popular. But I'm really excited to offer them for the first time because it is an introductory offer for $279. So you can purchase all 3 classes for that low price. And when you come out of these classes, you're going to have really sharp skills that are going to enable you to really help make your content sharper, richer, more robust, and a fabulous experience for your audience. Now, as I promised, I wanted to give you 5 actionable steps at the end of the webinar today so that you can really walk away with some robust information. So here's the things that I want you to do now that you're walking away from the webinar. The first thing you should do is you should definitely go to Content U and register for the classes. But then you should look for customer research in your organization. Talk to people who have been there longer than you have. Talk to your boss about what you know about your target audiences. If you already have personas, when was the last time they were updated? Take a look at them. Has anything changed about those personas that you could sort of start talking about again with your teams to become reinvigorated around that idea? The second thing I think that you should do is you should identify 3 stakeholders who might be helpful to you. And again, look for the people who are enthusiastic, either in good ways or bad ways. It's always really helpful when you can convert an enemy to a friend. Find 3 people in your organization who you might be able to pull in, who could really help you create a multidisciplinary content team. Take a look at your style guide. That's your key governance tool, and see when was the last time it was updated. How do people access it? Is it centralized? Is it a living document? Is it something printed that people get once a year? Just take a look at it and see what it looks like and what state it's in. Then the next thing I want you to do is just sketch your current workflow. How is content currently created in your organization? What does it look like when it's created? Who publishes it? Who puts it on social media? Are all those different people talking to each other? How are they getting direction? Are they following one single strategy? And then the 5th thing that I'd like you to do is identify one missing role your team needs. So what's really important about doing that is you need to find one person who you think, or one role from a content team who you think could help you create more robust content experiences. I see that we're at the end of our time for today. This was very exciting, and I'm really glad that you were all able to participate. If you do have questions, I've given you a number of different ways to reach me. You can reach me at Ahava at ahamediagroup.com with any questions. Today we didn't take any questions on the webinar, but you can certainly email them to me. And during the live training classes at Content U, you will certainly be able to ask questions and interact. And you can also reach me at that phone number and at that Twitter handle. So I look forward to hearing from you, and thank you so much for making our first webinar a huge success. Have a wonderful day. Happy holidays.